The UFC has been a place for young mixed martial artists to pursue their dreams of fame and glory since it began in 1993. Some of these fighters made their mark on UFC history by battling their way to the championship belt at an age much younger than most of their peers. Today, we're going to take a look at 5 of the youngest fighters to ever become UFC champions. This is Ultimate MMA. 22-year-old Frank Shamrock entered the UFC in a championship fight against the then undefeated Kevin Jackson. If his last name sounds familiar, you might be thinking of Frank's older foster brother, UFC Hall of Famer Ken Shamrock. I guess Ken did well to foster Frank's fighting spirit from an early age. Frank Shamrock defended his title 5 times, winning each in a decisive fashion.
He's out cold. He's out cold. He dropped him on his head. He's out cold.
Frank Shamrock defends his title.
For example, he broke the collarbone and vertebrae of kickboxer Igor Zinoviev, pushing him into early retirement. The most exciting battle, however, was against Tito Ortiz at UFC 22. This fight was hyped, and the general consensus was that Ortiz was just too big and strong for Shamrock to handle.
Might go back to it.
15 seconds, working Ortiz still.
And he's down. Over. What a gutsy performance by the champ.
But in a flurry of elbows and hammer fists, Ortiz was frankly taken out in the 4th round. There's no question that Frank Shamrock left his mark on the octagon, adding to the Shamrock legacy.
You earned it more than anybody else ever has. The greatest champion in our history.
Carlos Newton's reign in the UFC was short-lived, but we still give him credit as one of the youngest champions in UFC history. He entered the octagon at UFC 17, defeating Bob Gilstrap and then going on to fight Dan Henderson that same night. It was a controversial decision, but Newton lost that fight. He made his comeback against Pat Miletich at UFC 31.
Looking to lock it in. Looking to lock it in. There's the tip. It's over. Carlos Newton has choked out Pat Miletich. And we have a new world welterweight champion.
Newton got Miletich in a headlock and locked in his own spot as one of the youngest UFC champions, winning the welterweight championship belt at the age of 24. Barnett has racked up 35 wins out of 43 fights. 29 of those wins came via knockout or submission. It's not too surprising that the 24-year-old Barnett would become known as one of the youngest UFC champions. He gained his championship status at UFC 36 against legendary UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture.
He's punching him. Seconds to Randy Couture. No. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new champion.
And it's over. The new champion.
I told you guys.
Baby-faced assassin.
I told you.
Barnett.
First 2 rounds.
While it was an impressive victory, ultimately that heavyweight championship status was stripped from Barnett when he tested positive for steroid use. Eventually, Barnett would leave the UFC, claiming he lacked trust in the United States Anti-Doping Agency. Regardless of the questionable circumstances, Barnett was able to defeat a legendary opponent for the championship. Though he gained his first UFC championship at the age of 24, Jose Aldo had been fighting in Brazil long before that. Aldo was a champion in World Extreme Cage Fighting, which merged with the UFC in 2010. As a result of that merger, Aldo and many other WEC fighters transitioned over to the UFC. Aldo became the inaugural UFC featherweight champion and defended his title for the first time against Mark Hominick at UFC 129.
Big shots by Hominick. Aldo pouncing on under 90 seconds on the clock here in the 3rd.
During his reign, Aldo gained a Fight of the Night honor at UFC 156 against Frankie Edgar. Jose Aldo finally lost his featherweight championship at UFC 194 against the one and only, the notorious Conor McGregor.
Conor McGregor, black trunks for the champion, Jose Aldo Jr.
Conor relaxed and smiling.
Oh!
He slapped him!
Like that! Conor McGregor is the new UFC featherweight champion of the world!
In his first loss in over a decade, Aldo was taken out 13 seconds into the first round. Despite his decisive loss, he will forever hold a place as one of the great young champions in UFC history. Often considered one of the greatest MMA fighters in the history of the sport, Jon "Bones" Jones takes no prisoners. He won the light heavyweight championship belt at the age of 23, and 3 years later he's still holding on to it. Jones gained his youngest UFC champion status at UFC 128 against Mauricio Hua. He took down the Brazilian via a TKO in the third round. A body shot and a knee to the head was enough for Jones to take the title from Hua.
That one opened a brutal elbow. Big elbows. Trying to finish his fight. Shoulders badly hurt by
Jon Jones! Looking to finish Shogun!
vicious knee to the body and an uppercut.
You need to fight back! Jones to the body! And it is all over! Jon Jones is the youngest champion in UFC history!
Since then, Bones has been virtually unstoppable, with an amazing record of 26 wins and 1 loss. Jones has an excellent set of weapons in his MMA arsenal. One of his signature moves, the oblique kick, targets the knees and pushes them into extension. Many credit this kick with Jones' ability to control the pace of the fight. It should also be noted that Jones has been the subject of some controversy during his career. He's been accused of eye poking and even has failed a couple drug tests. Though in 2019 he was given 42 no-notice drug tests, more than nearly any athlete in any sport ever. Regardless of substance testing, the substantive evidence of his MMA prowess is virtually unmatched. After all, he has 14 title fight wins, the most in UFC history. We're just waiting for a challenger that can even come close to picking a bone with this iconic UFC champion. Until then, viva la Jon Jones. Who are some young fighters we may have missed? Are there any up-and-coming fighters you think could take on Jon Jones? Is age 24 a magic year to make a championship push? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more UFC coverage, be sure to subscribe for new videos every week. Until next time, this is Ultimate MMA.